They doubted her suffering and questioned her honesty. But a single hospital bill exposed the truth, leaving the family stunned and silent. Margaret Hayes woke in the gray light of dawn, her head pounding, every joint aching with a dull, insistent pain. She lay still for a moment, gathering strength, watching the ceiling fan whirl above her bed. The pain was familiar by now, a shadow that followed her from morning until night, even though most people couldn't see it. With a quiet sigh, she pushed herself upright, careful not to let the ache show on her face. The house was silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She moved slowly to the kitchen, making her way past a calendar crowded with doctor appointments, blood work reminders, and medication schedules. Margaret set the kettle to boil, then checked her phone. No new messages from her son, Eric. She wondered if he'd call today, but she didn't hold her breath. After breakfast, Margaret prepared for her weekly check-in with Dr. Patel. She gathered a folder stuffed with medical reports, insurance forms, and a notebook full of her symptoms. The drive to the medical clinic was slow, every stoplight felt longer than the last, and her hands shook a little on the steering wheel. At the clinic, she greeted the receptionist, checked in, and waited under the flickering fluorescent lights. Dr. Patel examined her carefully, listening as Margaret described her pain, its patterns, the sudden spikes, the deep fatigue. He reviewed her latest test results, nodding gravely. "You're not imagining this, Margaret. Your blood work confirms what you're feeling. We need to adjust your medication again." Relief mingled with frustration. Margaret was tired of fighting her own body, but grateful to be believed. After the appointment, Margaret sat in the clinic parking lot for a long while, mustering the energy to drive home. Her phone buzzed. It was Eric, finally. His tone was rushed and distracted. "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" She tried to explain, careful not to sound dramatic, that she'd had another flare-up, and the doctor was changing her medication. Eric's voice grew cool. "You know, Mom, I talked to Karen's friend last week. She says her mom had the same diagnosis but never missed a day of work. Are you sure it's as bad as you say? I just think sometimes you exaggerate to get sympathy." The words landed like a slap. Margaret's hand tightened on her phone. "Eric, I wish that were true. I'd give anything to feel normal again." But Eric kept talking, his doubt plain. "I mean, your tests always seem to cost so much. Are you sure you're not getting taken for a ride?" Margaret's heart ached more than her joints. She ended the call as politely as she could and stared out the windshield, willing herself not to cry. Back at home, Margaret put away her paperwork, trying to focus on something, anything, else. She baked banana bread for her neighbor, Mrs. Golden, and tended her little backyard garden, hoping the rhythm of ordinary tasks would settle her nerves. Later, Margaret's friend Clara called to check in. Margaret confessed how hurt she felt by Eric's words. "He thinks I'm lying, Clara. He thinks I'm making it all up." Clara's voice was full of sympathy. "You don't have to prove your pain to anyone, Margaret. But if you ever need help, I'm right here." That evening, Margaret sat alone at her dining table, hospital bills and insurance statements fanned out before her. She read each line, each charge, each cold, hard number. The truth of her illness was written in black and white, whether Eric wanted to see it or not. As the sky turned dark, Margaret took her medication and crawled into bed, exhausted in body and spirit. She wrote in her journal, "The hardest part isn't the pain. It's not being believed." She turned off the light, determined, despite everything, not to let doubt erase her reality. The next morning, Margaret rose with stiffness in her back and a dull ache in her hands. She forced herself through her morning routine, determined to keep her dignity and not let the pain control her day. Her neighbor, Mrs. Golden, knocked gently at the door just as Margaret was finishing her tea. "Just dropping by to say thank you for the banana bread. It was delicious." Mrs. Golden's eyes lingered with concern. "You look tired, dear. Everything all right?" Margaret forced a small smile. "Just a bit worn out. Doctor changed my medication again." Mrs. Golden squeezed her hand. "If you need anything, you know where I am." The kindness helped steady Margaret, who found herself wishing her own son could offer such comfort. Later, she set about her daily chores, watering the flowers, tidying the living room, sorting mail. In the pile, she found a thick envelope from the hospital. She opened it carefully, her heart thumping with a familiar dread. Page after page, lines of procedures, medication changes, and doctor consultations tallied into a final amount that made her breath catch. Margaret felt a pang of guilt, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because of how Eric might react if he saw the total. A call from the insurance company interrupted her thoughts. They needed clarification on her latest tests, and after a lengthy back and forth, they confirmed that several charges wouldn't be covered. Margaret wrote notes, circled numbers, and stacked the bills neatly. The numbers didn't lie. She wished her son would understand. That afternoon, she attended her support group at the community center, a monthly gathering of people living with chronic pain. She listened as others shared stories of disbelief from loved ones, bosses, even doctors. When it was her turn, Margaret spoke softly but clearly. "My son thinks I'm exaggerating. He told me I must want sympathy. Sometimes I wish he could feel this, just for a day, so he'd know I'm not making it up." Heads nodded in agreement. A few offered quiet words of solidarity. On her way home, Margaret stopped at the pharmacy for her new medication. She chatted briefly with the pharmacist, who recognized her and asked after her health. The small gesture gave her a sliver of hope. Someone in her world cared, even if it wasn't her own family. As dusk approached, Margaret's pain flared. She heated a bowl of soup, curled up with a blanket, and watched the evening news. The phone rang. Her sister Linda was on the line, calling from another state. Margaret hesitated before sharing her troubles, but Linda listened patiently, never once questioning her experience. "You know your body better than anyone, Maggie. I believe you. Don't let anyone make you feel small." After they hung up, Margaret sorted her paperwork, organizing bills and doctor's letters into folders. She ran her fingers over each statement, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. Her illness was real. It was here, spelled out in charges and codes. No matter what Eric believed, the truth was written everywhere. Before bed, Margaret made a list of everything she'd accomplished that day, no matter how small. Grocery list made. Support group attended. Bills sorted. Banana bread appreciated. She closed her journal with a sense of hard-earned pride. She would not let doubt steal her reality. Margaret woke to the distant sound of rain tapping against her bedroom window, the gentle rhythm providing a moment of calm before her body reminded her of the pain. She moved carefully, stretching her legs before swinging them to the floor. The weather seemed to seep into her bones, and each step sent a small ache up her spine. After breakfast, she sorted her morning pills, so many, they filled a weekly organizer twice over. She reviewed her schedule: physical therapy at 11, a phone appointment with Dr. Patel's nurse at 2, and the daunting task of reviewing her financial statements in the afternoon. Before leaving for physical therapy, Margaret called Eric, hoping for a few kind words. The call went to voicemail. She left a simple message: "Hi Eric, just wanted to check in. Hope you're well. I have another appointment today, but call when you have a moment." She hung up, her voice more hopeful than she felt. At the physical therapist's office, Margaret moved through her stretches and strength-building exercises, gritting her teeth through the discomfort. Her therapist, Monica, encouraged her gently. "You're making progress, Margaret. These small steps add up." Margaret managed a weak smile, wishing she could share even a fraction of Monica's faith in her. Afterward, she stopped at the cafe next to the clinic, ordering a cup of chamomile tea to steady her nerves. She found a quiet corner and watched the rain streak down the windows. Across the room, an older woman caught her eye and smiled in recognition: Mrs. Beckett from her support group. They exchanged a few words about the weather, the pain, and the small victories that kept them going. "Sometimes," Mrs. Beckett said, "we have to be our own cheerleaders. No one else can understand what it costs us just to show up." Margaret nodded, her heart aching with both gratitude and longing. She returned home in the early afternoon, feeling spent. The nurse from Dr. Patel's office called to go over her new prescription and discuss side effects. Margaret asked careful questions, taking notes. When the call ended, she felt more informed but still alone in the fight. The pile of bills on the table beckoned. Margaret laid them out, one by one: hospital stays, lab fees, physical therapy, prescription refills. She stacked insurance denials and handwritten notes from Dr. Patel, tracing the months of her illness in black and white. She gathered the paperwork into a large envelope, determined to keep it all in order, for herself, for anyone who ever questioned her, even her own son. As evening fell, Margaret forced herself to do something for pleasure. She pulled out her knitting, working slowly on a scarf for Mrs. Golden's grandson. The act of creation soothed her, even as her hands protested. Later, Clara dropped by with a container of homemade soup and a hug. "You're stronger than you think, Margaret. Some people can't see what's real, but that doesn't make it any less true." After dinner, Margaret wrote in her journal, "Pain is real. Kindness is real. Doubt can be loud, but I will be louder in the ways that matter." She went to bed as the rain eased, wrapped in a quiet certainty that, while not everyone would believe her, she would not surrender her truth. Margaret awoke to bright sunlight filtering through her blinds, a rare break in the weather, promising at least a little warmth. After a slow breakfast, she made a to-do list for the day: laundry, refill her pillbox, call the insurance again, and, most daunting, face another conversation with Eric. She started with the simplest tasks, folding towels in the laundry room while listening to her favorite radio program. The cheerful voices made her smile despite her discomfort. When she'd finished, she set out her medication for the week, her hands moving methodically through the routine. She was interrupted by a knock at the door, Mrs. Golden returning her baking dish and offering fresh tulips from her yard. "I hope these brighten your table," the neighbor said. The small kindness brought Margaret nearly to tears. Encouraged, Margaret decided to tackle the insurance calls next. She spent nearly an hour on the phone, clarifying bills and contesting a denied claim for her latest round of blood work. The agent on the other end sounded sympathetic, promising to escalate her appeal. Margaret carefully documented every detail, feeling both frustration and resolve. Each line item was proof of her experience, even if it exhausted her. By lunchtime, she felt drained but determined not to let the day slip away. She prepared a simple sandwich and ate in the sun by her window, savoring the warmth and color of Mrs. Golden's tulips on the table. The phone rang. This time, it was Eric. Margaret's heart pounded as she answered. His tone was guarded. "Mom, I've been thinking. You sent me all those bills and reports, but honestly, it just looks like a lot of paperwork. Karen keeps asking if you're being taken advantage of. Are you sure all these treatments are necessary?" Margaret bristled, her voice steady but low. "Eric, every appointment, every test, every pill is because the doctors say I need it. I wish it were different, but I have to do what they recommend." Eric sighed, his words skeptical. "I just don't understand why you can't get better. It feels like you're always talking about pain, and—" "I don't know, Mom. It's a lot." Margaret listened, fighting the urge to defend herself further. She realized then that nothing she said could change his mind. He had to see for himself. "I know it's hard to understand, Eric. But this is my life, day in and day out. I'd love for you to come to an appointment with me sometime. Maybe then it would make more sense." Eric paused, non-committal. "Maybe. I'll think about it." The call ended with no real resolution, leaving Margaret sadder but oddly lighter. She had spoken her truth, firm and calm. Later, she walked to the community center for her support group. There, she was welcomed with open arms, friends sharing updates and encouragement. Margaret told them about her latest conversation with Eric, her voice trembling with both pain and relief. The group listened, nodding, then one woman offered, "You're doing everything right, Margaret. We see you, even if your family doesn't." Back home, Margaret treated herself to a slice of pie and a long, soothing bath. She allowed herself a moment of pride for surviving the day's emotional toll. Before sleep, she wrote, "Some days the receipts matter more than words. I am done apologizing for what is real." She turned out the light, tulips glowing softly in the moonlight, determined to honor her own reality. Friday arrived with a chill, the kind that lingered in Margaret's bones even after a hot shower. She dressed in layers, moving slowly but refusing to let the aches define her day. After breakfast, she checked her calendar. Today was the monthly community health fair at the senior center, where free screenings and consultations were offered. Margaret decided to go, partly for her own checkup, but mostly to stay connected with people who understood. She gathered her growing folder of medical bills and test results, determined to seek advice from the center's health advocate about managing insurance appeals. Before leaving, she received a brief text from Clara, "Thinking of you. Let me know if you want company later." Margaret smiled, grateful for friendship that came without suspicion or strings. At the center, The halls buzzed with quiet activity. Margaret joined the line for blood pressure checks, chatting with Mrs. Beckett from her support group and a retired nurse she'd met months ago. After her checkup, she sat down with the health advocate, a sharp-eyed woman named Lila. They combed through the stack of bills together, Lila pointing out several items Margaret should dispute. "It's a lot to manage, but you're not alone. Bring me anything you're not sure about," Lila assured her. Feeling more empowered, Margaret visited the coffee table, where she was joined by Mrs. Golden and Mrs. Tran. The women swapped stories about stubborn insurance reps, unsympathetic relatives, and the odd triumphs of navigating the system. Margaret listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes aching at the common threads in their stories. After the fair, Margaret stopped at the grocery store, picking up fruit and a bouquet of cheerful daisies. As she stood in line, she overheard a conversation behind her. Two women discussing their mother's health issues, one dismissing her own mother's complaints as just wanting attention. Margaret felt a pang. How easily pain could be overlooked, dismissed. Returning home, Margaret tidied her kitchen, set the daisies in a vase, and made herself lunch. She tried to call Eric, no answer, so she left a message, "Stopped by the health fair today. Met with an advocate who's helping me with bills. Hope you're well. Call when you can." That afternoon, Clara came by with scones and good humor, and the two women enjoyed tea in the sunroom. Margaret confided her frustrations about Eric. Clara listened, offering no easy answers, but plenty of validation. "You're doing everything right, Margaret. His doubt doesn't change your truth." Later, Margaret reviewed her paperwork one more time, making notes for her next round of insurance calls. She realized she no longer felt apologetic or desperate to convince anyone. The facts were plain. Her illness was as real as the medication in her hand and the bills on her table. As evening fell, Margaret joined her support group's online meeting, where members celebrated each other's small victories and hard-won clarity. She shared her progress with the insurance appeal and received a flurry of supportive messages. Before bed, Margaret wrote in her journal, "I am not my pain, but I am not a liar. The paper trail is long, but so is my patience." With the daisies bright beside her, Margaret drifted to sleep feeling, finally, seen. Saturday began with a slow ache in Margaret's back, but she refused to let it keep her from the small milestones she'd set for herself. After breakfast, she bundled up and walked to the corner bakery for a fresh loaf of bread, exchanging neighborly greetings with Mrs. Tran and her grandson, who insisted on carrying Margaret's bag home. The ordinary kindnesses steadied her heart. Back at home, she tidied the kitchen, sorting through the growing pile of insurance forms and medical statements. The doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Golden, delivering a casserole, "Just in case you don't feel like cooking." Margaret accepted it with a grateful laugh. The scent of baked cheese filled her house, mingling with the daisies on the windowsill. Mid-morning brought an unexpected visitor, Eric. He arrived unannounced, standing awkwardly on the front porch with his hands stuffed in his pockets. Margaret invited him in, offering tea and a slice of the bakery bread. Eric glanced at the stack of bills on the table and shook his head. "It just seems like a lot, Mom. Are you sure you're not being overcharged, or, I don't know, taken advantage of?" His skepticism stung, but Margaret was prepared. She calmly placed her folder in front of him, pointing out doctor's signatures, insurance denials, and highlighted notes from Dr. Patel. "Eric, these are real. Every number, every visit. I would never choose this, and I wish I didn't have to keep explaining." She spoke evenly, refusing to let her voice tremble. Eric thumbed through the papers, his brow furrowing as he realized the scope of her reality. After a pause, Eric softened a little. "I guess I didn't know it was this much. I worry about you. I don't want you to be alone in this." Margaret nodded, feeling both relief and frustration. "Then believe me. That's all I need from you. Not suspicion, just trust." The conversation moved on, awkward, but honest. Eric helped her change a light bulb, checked the batteries in her smoke detectors, and lingered over a second cup of tea. When he left, he hugged her longer than usual, though he didn't promise to come again soon. Exhausted but proud, Margaret called Clara and recounted the encounter. "He's starting to understand," she said. "Or at least he's trying." That evening, Margaret attended her support group's monthly dinner. The group gathered at Mrs. Beckett's house, sharing potluck dishes and stories. When Margaret shared that Eric had finally looked through her paperwork, the group cheered her persistence. "You don't owe anyone proof, Margaret," said Mrs. Beckett. "But sometimes, seeing is believing." Margaret returned home late, her heart a little lighter. She tidied the kitchen, set out her medication for the next day, and placed Eric's empty teacup in the sink with a small, hopeful smile. Before bed, she wrote in her journal, "Every page, every bill, my truth is undeniable. Even if belief comes slowly, I will not let doubt undo me." She slept well, bolstered by her own resolve and the small, hard-won steps toward understanding. Sunday dawned bright, the first truly warm day in weeks. Margaret opened her windows to let in the fresh air, savoring the gentle breeze as she arranged the daisies and casserole leftovers on her kitchen table. For once, the pain in her joints was manageable, and she took it as a sign to treat herself kindly. She started her morning with a walk around the block, taking her time, pausing to chat with neighbors who remarked on her resilience. Mrs. Tran waved from her garden, and Mrs. Golden invited her over for afternoon coffee. Margaret agreed, feeling her circle of support tightening around her like a comforting shawl. Later that morning, Margaret called her sister Linda and filled her in on Eric's visit. "It's not perfect," Margaret admitted, "but I think he's finally beginning to see what I'm living with." Linda cheered her on. "You're stronger than you know, Maggie. Keep holding your ground." After lunch, Margaret gathered her paperwork for one last review before mailing her insurance appeals. She included a detailed cover letter, highlighting the procedures, dates, and denials. Each page felt like a piece of armor, not just for the insurance company, but for herself and the truth of her experience. That afternoon, Margaret joined Mrs. Golden and a few others for coffee and homemade scones. Conversation drifted from recipes to stories of grandchildren to gentle, honest talk about the things that hurt most. Margaret admitted, "Sometimes, I just want to be believed without having to prove anything." The women nodded in understanding, their silence as supportive as any words. As the day wound down, Margaret received a text from Eric. "Thanks for showing me the paperwork. I know I haven't been fair. Hope you're feeling okay today." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was more than she'd hoped for. She replied simply, "Thank you for coming. That meant a lot. I'm doing my best, one day at a time." That evening, Margaret baked a loaf of bread to bring to the next support group meeting. The act of measuring, kneading, and waiting for the dough to rise felt like meditation, proof that, even now, she could nurture herself and others. Before bed, Margaret reflected in her journal. "Trust is slow. But I am patient. I will live my truth and let the facts speak for me, every day." As the night settled in, Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months, quiet, strong, and utterly real. The new week began with a flurry of errands. Margaret bundled up, feeling the steadiness in her steps as she walked to the post office, her folder of insurance appeals tucked under her arm. The clerk, familiar with Margaret's monthly ritual, gave her a knowing nod as she mailed the thick envelope. It felt like sending out a piece of herself, her story, her reality, out into a world that too often doubted it. Afterward, Margaret stopped by the pharmacy. The pharmacist greeted her by name, asking about her latest test results. Margaret answered honestly, grateful for the rare moment of being heard without skepticism. As she left, Mrs. Tran called from across the parking lot, waving to offer a ride home. Margaret gratefully accepted, sharing neighborhood news and swapping gentle jokes as they drove. At home, she found a letter from the insurance company, a rare, hopeful sign that her appeal was moving forward. Margaret filed it with the rest of her paperwork, her hands steady and sure. She allowed herself a moment to savor this small but meaningful progress. That afternoon, Margaret hosted her support group for tea. The group crowded around her dining table, exchanging stories, paperwork strategies, and hard-won victories. When it was Margaret's turn, she shared the news of her appeal and Eric's visit. "He's not all the way there," she admitted, "but he's looking at the truth now. That's enough for me." The conversation turned to the challenge of invisibility, how so many illnesses were silent, seen only in receipts and exhaustion. The group's laughter and solidarity felt like a balm. Margaret realized she had found her truest advocates among these friends. As evening fell, Margaret's phone rang. It was Eric. His voice was softer, a little awkward. "I just wanted to check in, Mom. And I'm sorry for doubting you. I didn't know how much you were handling. Margaret swallowed the lump in her throat. Thank you, Eric. That means more than you know. They talked for a while, not about pain or bills, but about old memories and favorite recipes. When the call ended, Margaret felt lighter, as if a years-old knot had finally begun to untangle. Later, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the quiet chaos of used teacups, half-eaten bread, and the laughter of her support group still echoing in the walls. She thought of all she had endured, not just the pain, but the doubt, the silence, and the invisible battles. Margaret opened her journal and wrote her final reflection. My illness is not a lie, and neither is my strength. My story is written in every bill, every test, every act of self-kindness. Today I am heard. Today I am enough. She closed the journal, folded away the last of her paperwork, and looked out at the night sky, peaceful, steadfast, and entirely her own.